The government today put a gun to Telstra's head. The telco giant has been told to either split in two voluntarily or it will be carved apart by the government. The idea here is to boost competition in the telecoms sector, particularly ahead of the new national broadband network being brought to life. But the fear is that this will be another blow to Telstra shareholders, the so-called mum and dad investors who were encouraged by the former government to put their savings into this company. Now, the government today announced this plan, as a set of historic reforms. The government's legislation aims to introduce tougher regulations and more powers for the ACCC. Red tape will be reduced and consumer safeguards improved, but the showstopper is the breakup of Telstra. The company is being urged to voluntarily split its retail and wholesale arms in two. In other words, Telstra Retail will have to compete on the same footing as Optus, Vodafone and everyone else when using the copper and fibre network operated by Telstra Wholesale. If Telstra does this voluntarily, that avoids a whole lot of legal messiness for the government. If it refuses, the government will force it to functionally separate. It can stay as one company, but its retail and wholesale divisions will have to be at arm's length from each other. There aren't many carrots in this for Telstra, but there is another stick. If it refuses to split voluntarily, and it still wants to be a player in the new wireless broadband world, the government will force it to get out of the pay TV game by selling its 50% stake in Foxtel. The minister is confident, though, that everyone can be a winner under his plan.
They are the most significant reforms in telecommunications since 1997. The measures provide the flexibility for Telstra to choose its future path. The bill will strengthen consumer safeguards. It will promote competition. It will drive lower prices, better quality and more innovative services.
Well, the plans are being introduced and will be considered by a Senate committee before being debated in Parliament before the end of the year. That means there will be 10 or 12 weeks of negotiation with Telstra in the government's effort to encourage it to separate voluntarily. Now, the Greens have already welcomed the government's move here. They see this as an important boost to competition, but the Liberals are worried about the 1.4 million Telstra shareholders.
It raises huge uncertainty for Telstra's 9 million customers, its 1.4 million shareholders, its 30,000 employees. Already today, in just the short time since the government made this announcement, our mum and dad shareholders of Telstra have lost $2 billion in the value of their company as a result of this radical and risky proposal. Is the government punishing?
Well, as for Telstra, its new Chief Executive David Thodey today expressed his disappointment at the government's announcement, but he says he is willing to work cooperatively with the government in this negotiation phase. So, is this a blow for Telstra and its shareholders? I spoke earlier to the Communications Minister, Stephen Conroy.
Well, look, we've put forward a choice. Telstra are engaged in very constructive discussions with us at the moment, and they've been ongoing for some time. We won't be speculating about what's in them or how they're proceeding, but I think it's important to note that Telstra have, since the change of leadership, are taking a very constructive approach. We've given them a number of options. If they want to move into the future in mobile telephony, then there's going to be certain requirements of them. But what people don't realise is that the previous government, and to be fair, the government before that, the former Hawke-Keating government, made some long-term structural mistakes when it came to the telecommunications sector. And what this policy reform...
Allowing Telstra to become too powerful.
Absolutely. We've got Telstra, the most vertically integrated company virtually in the world in the telco sector. After 10 to 15 years of competition, we've still got 90% of profits made in the sector made by one company.
You say that you're giving them a choice, but if they don't agree to structurally split in two, you're going to functionally separate them anyway.
Well, that's right, because at the moment we believe there's a market failure.
So it's not much of a choice.
Well, we're offering them an opportunity. They can choose to stay exactly as they are and nothing will happen to them.
Won't you functionally separate
Well,
them?
we functionally separate them, but they're still the same company.
That's not nothing, is it?
Well, if you look around the world, there's a growing trend where you've had an incumbent telco that has been too powerful. Other governments, when they've privatised them, have separated them. The Productivity Commission said in Australia before the Howard government privatised. The ACCC said in Australia before the Howard government privatised. You should separate these companies. So this has been a long-term policy failure stretching back over 20 years, and we are reforming that to introduce competition which will ultimately see cheaper prices and faster broadband speeds for all Australians.
Well, whatever they decide, whether they agree to structurally separate or whether you force them to functionally separate, it is going to come at a cost to the company. And investors have responded in kind today since your announcement. The company at one point was down, its shares were down 5%. So clearly investors don't think this is going to be the win-win for everybody that you think.
Well, investors react to the short-term announcements. What I think the investors in Telstra need to have trust in is that their new leadership at Telstra understands that it has to deliver a win-win, and the government understands it has to deliver a win-win, because that's what the country needs. The country needs...
How is this a win for the company if you're going to force them to functionally separate if they don't agree to do it themselves?
Well, if you look at around the world, we have got some of the slowest broadband speeds and the most expensive broadband speeds. And 90% of the profits are being made by one company in the sector. So I think if you look on any objective test, the policy prescriptions over the last 20 years have not produced cheap, affordable and fast broadband for Australians.
But I agree that this will hopefully deliver a win for consumers. But all I'm asking is, why won't you acknowledge that this will cost shareholders of Telstra?
Well, what we can point to is BT's example. Now, Telstra have done some estimations about what it might cost them to functionally separate, but if you look at what BT have said publicly about what it costs them to functionally separate, they're very dramatically different figures. So I'm not going to respond to each individual claim by Telstra or any of the other companies. What we're focused on is getting the right structure. What we're focused on is the national interest, and that Australians are crying out for faster broadband. Australia's falling behind because our kids aren't getting the best educational opportunities, our small businesses aren't getting the opportunities to compete interstate as well as overseas, and our productivity is being held back because we've had a failure to address a structural issue for the last 20 years.
All right, just one more question about the shareholders in this. You ruled out compensation. You said you've received legal advice that there won't be compensation necessary to Telstra.
Well, all of the advice we see publicly in the newspapers all indicates that if we were to formally direct the separation of Telstra, there would be a compensation question, which is why we haven't gone down that path. We've provided options. There's the option...
Sorry, are you saying compensation is still possible or not?
No, if we passed a law that said you must structurally separate, then on all the advice you read about in the newspapers, there would be a compensation question.
But what about functional separation?
Functional separation, there is no one who's suggested at this stage, and look, lawyers are able to come up with different opinions and we accept that, but no one out there has suggested that functional separation being mandated is a compensation issue. So we're comfortable that we believe that we provided the right balance between the options and choices for Telstra and what's good for the Australian economy.
Why doesn't a family who invested in Telstra as late as yesterday deserve compensation for the fact the company they put their money into is now going to be a very different company?
Well, Telstra are still going to be able to provide all of the things that they currently do if they choose to sit and do nothing. We're not mandating that Telstra do anything. We're saying if you want to move into the next generation of mobile technologies, you need new spectrum. And if you want to be involved in buying that spectrum, then there are some conditions that we're going to be putting on you. Because at the moment, they have copper, they have mobile, and they have Foxtel, and they have the cable. So they're in every platform, and then they want to move into the new one. We're saying we need to find a way to create more competition so Australians as a whole are better off.
Let's get into the detail on that. You have said there that they can't continue to hold all of this, but will it be possible, if Telstra separates its wholesale and its retail arms, to still own its 50% stake in Foxtel?
Look, this is important to be very clear about this. If Telstra decide not to structurally separate, then they can continue to hold Foxtel and the HFC cable. If they want to get access to this new spectrum to allow the new mobile technologies that are coming, then they will need to structurally separate. They will need to divest their cable, and they will need to sell their
They need to do
Foxtel
both.
assets.
They need to structurally separate and sell
If,
Foxtel.
however, they voluntarily provide an enforceable undertaking that is acceptable to the ACCC, then I have the discretion to not proceed with the divestiture of HFC and the Foxtel.
Okay,
so if they put forward a proposition themselves that says, hey, look, we accept that the government wants to restructure the sector and the industry, and we're prepared to go down this path, then I have the discretion to not enforce those aspects of the legislation.
So if they go far enough with the structural separation voluntarily between wholesale and retail arms of Telstra, you may decide to allow them to keep Foxtel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. The government's future fund a few weeks ago sold off a big chunk of Telstra shares. Did they know this announcement was coming?
No, look, absolutely not. I mean, David Murray and the Future Fund Guardians operate completely independently. I think, other than briefly seeing David recently at a weekend conference, I haven't had any conversations in the last couple of months with David. Look, I think they operate entirely within their own mandate. It's independent of government. It is a complete coincidence. We had no, or certainly I had no knowledge. They were about to take that action, and they had no knowledge I was about to take this action. The reason you set up an independent board of guardians is so that you can separate out those issues. But no, total coincidence.
And just a final one on the media landscape. If indeed Telstra were required to sell their stake in Foxtel, that may well bring other players like Seven, News, Consolidated Media Holdings into increasing stakes in Foxtel. How is that going to improve diversity in the media landscape?
Well, look, firstly, this is a hypothetical. It's based on a number of guesses about what Telstra will want to do. But so I can't predict what Telstra can do. But what I do understand is that with the Foxtel ownerships, there is a right of first refusal to the incumbent other shareholders. So I'm not sure that some of those other factors come into play quite as directly, if that was ultimately to be a decision that Telstra made. But at this stage, that's prejudging what Telstra are thinking. If you look at what David Thodey said since the press conference this morning, again, very constructive. And we have been, as I said, for some weeks in discussions about moving forward. David's again said today that they support the government's NBN vision. So I think you're getting a very clear sign that you've got a new leadership at Telstra that's looking to the future, that is looking to take the Telstra company forward into the new media age. So I'm very excited by the opportunities that are coming, both in terms of the digital and analogue switch off and multi-channeling that are happening in another part of my portfolio, the NBN developments, and all of the things we've been talking about today. It's a very, very exciting time to be involved in the communications portfolio.
Stephen Conroy, thank you.
Thanks very much.